Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, follow it, share it, give it a big fat review. You can also follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates about upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram at Chicopee. Be sure to stop by their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's in Big Y on Memorial Drive, or stop by MetroJeep.com and make it Metro. And then drive home in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
In more than just a few cases, you'll find an artist that is nearly impossible to pin down. They don't necessarily pigeonhole themselves into just one style or genre, nor do they stick to what might have become expected of them to do because it may have worked so well the last time around. Whether it be through their own creative restlessness or through a desire to challenge themselves artistically, they simply refuse to define where they might go next. And it isn't necessarily because of a lack of focus. In fact, it's usually the exact opposite. Because in reality, reinvention takes an extraordinary amount of focus, especially if evolving reinvention is the thing that defines you the most. You see, some people just simply refuse to accept complacency. Does that sort of thing come at the expense of some of your fans, or does that sort of thing welcome in new ones? And is it possible to have it both ways? Or does it even matter? Because an argument could be made that a real artist isn't just making things to satisfy everybody else. Instead, the true mark of an artist is there to express what's within them. And like most human beings, those things are not always stationary. Which brings me to a guy like Justin Warfield. Justin is a California-based DJ who released his first record 33 years ago in 1993 at the age of 20. The first album was called My Field Trip to Planet 9, a fusion of 90s-era hip-hop and psychedelia. And while it may not have been a commercial success at the time, it established Justin as a promising young talent. What people didn't realize was that Justin had a lot more up his sleeve. 2 years later, he released the album The Justin Warfield Supernaut, which was a complete pivot, and then he largely ditched the hip-hop in favor of a more classic rock sound. While it may have confused some fans at the time, it was actually a pretty damn good record. In 1996, he joined the band 1 Inch Punch. Their one and only album together, The Tao of the 1 Inch Punch, was an interesting fusion of hip-hop and industrial music. And while that description may not really do it justice, it would be a few years before Justin Warfield would wind up reinventing himself again, this time as the lead singer, guitar player, and keyboardist for the Darkwave duo She Wants Revenge, with multi-instrumentalist Adam Braven. Their first album in 2006 peaked at number 9 in the U.S. rock charts and eventually went gold. Again, this was unlike anything he had released before. It was a collaboration that was clearly inspired by such post-punk bands as Bauhaus and Joy Division, which is an entire world away from those early hip-hop recordings. She Wants Revenge would eventually release 2 more albums, 2007's This Is Forever and 2011's Valley Heart. A few more singles and reunion tours would follow for the next several years until 2023. Late last year, Justin switched up again and released a new solo album under the name Warfield. The new record is called Darkwave Devotionals. What makes this record so interesting is that he's taken the dark wave that defined She Wants Revenge and has made it even darker, leaning into a more gothic and death rock direction. The end result is maybe the best album of his career. To talk about that and how he made it is my guest today, Justin Warfield, on Baxie's Musical Podcast.
I've had the chance in the last week or so to go down the Justin Warfield rabbit hole, and it's been awesome. I mean, I knew about She Wants Revenge, but I didn't really know much about the early stuff. And having listened to the new record, it's like this is arguably the best record you've ever put out. So congratulations to it. I think it's really awesome.
Thank you so much. That's very generous of you to say. I mean, yeah, I feel like it's very obvious, even though I'm in it, it's very clear to me that my musical evolution and devolution and sort of tangents are odd to the casual listener or someone who's new to where I came from and that progression. But it's interesting because as I look around the studio and I see vintage drum machines and keyboards and I look at the records on the walls and I see, a De La Soul skateboard and, a Bowie book and a Velvet Underground thing. It all makes perfect sense to me
Yeah.
because I just follow the muse and the inspiration. But from the outside, I could see that it would be very unorthodox.
Well, I would imagine your record people must be driven crazy by all this, but I find the reinvention actually really interesting. I mean, you're kind of like a moving target. Where does that come from? Is it a matter of restlessness or exposure to new influences, or is it somewhere in between or beyond that?
When I was younger, it was exposure to new influences. I mean, when you get signed at 16, and as the quote from Lou Reed goes, is growing up in public. When I got signed at 16 and put out my first single at 17, and then made, 18, my second single comes out. Um, by the time I made my first album and it came out in 1993, I'd been working on it for 2.5 years.
Mm.
And that evolution, new influences came in, new things, you know what I mean? So while I may have grown up on new wave and hip hop, and then things changed around, say, 1989 when De La Soul is Dead, or Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique really changed the game and made anything possible. Those were influences, but like I was also starting to get more into Sonic Youth.
Right.
I was also starting to get more into, I'd been into Jane's Addiction, but was deeply into Jane's Addiction. I had always been into Led Zeppelin. And then the difference is once I had the facility and the ability of the musicians around me, or the impetus, or the sort of bravado or courage to say, yes, I'm making a hip hop record, but I want to do a song that sounds like a Zeppelin song. Then, and I had the means to, because I had learned how to make beats and I could play guitar enough to form a bar chord and do it. So it is new influences. At this point, at almost 53 years old, it's not new influences and it's not restlessness. It's, what do I feel like I have to contribute to the conversation musically? What is inspiring me from inside? And I would amend what I just said about new influences. Even at 53, new influences come in. I don't want to age myself. I am still 52.
You're still younger than me, so it's all it's all good. All good.
Yeah. So with Death Rock Devotionals, I started writing a song that sounded unlike anything I had done before in its energy, in the tempo. That song, All the Fun, was like the key that unlocked this album. I came up with this riff and I was like, God, that's very punky. And I was like, oh, it reminds me of fill in the blank, Christian Death or Adolescence or, Damned or whatever. But I had been like, it's not by accident, because I'm reading a book called Phantoms by Mikey Bean. And my friend listens to some other demos and goes, man, these sound like Damn. And I start taking in these things. And then I start thinking about, I'm working on a film project and I'm writing it and it's set in 1985. I'm thinking about 1985 and the clubs there and the Hong Kong Cafe in Los Angeles and the Atomic Cafe and Madame Wong's East and West, two different Chinese restaurants that bands like the Go-Go's or, every punk band of the X would play. And I was thinking about a time and place in Los Angeles that I had a nostalgia for, because I never saw it with grown-up eyes. I saw it with child's eyes. And so I'm thinking about it and living in this space. And then it's no accident that when I pick up the guitar, the riff that comes out feels like everything that I'm in. So it's not as simple as hearing an influence from the outside and going like, oh, that subconsciously influenced me. I mean, I like to stay open. I don't want to ever be, as a musician or creative person or artist, I never want to be a get off my lawn. You don't understand. It was so much better when we, because that's sort of a death to me,
It's funny though, because guys our age, and we're not that far apart really, but I mean, we've all gone through changes. As a listener to music, what I listened to 30 years ago is not the same as what I listen to today. To evolve in that same way takes a certain amount of courage, because there are a lot of artists out there that simply stay in a lane and never leave. I mean, like try to like David Bowie, had he just stayed in, in one direction and didn't experiment and take influences and find ways of bringing himself and other characters into what he did. I mean, it took a certain amount of courage to do that.
Well, it's an interesting thing that you said, because courage, and I did say sort of a similar sentiment when I was saying at 18 making a record that was outside of, when you're 18 and you're making a hip hop record and you have the courage to bring in Jane's Addiction and Led Zeppelin into the same song on an instrumental on the record, there is a courage there, but it's also not knowing, having being it's like the fearlessness, the folly of youth, thinking that you're going to trailblaze, but also a little bit not giving an F, and also like being brave enough because but it ties into the larger thing, which is Bowie, Prince, Madonna. I would say Iggy Pop in some ways, because he's made records ranging from Lust to Life, New Values, Stooges. He's made sort of crooner ballads. The bands that I love bands that are singular. Like I love Oasis, right? Those first two records are among the best I've ever heard. I think that Trent Reznor is one of the artists of our lifetime. You hear one piano note followed by a second, and you're like, that's Trent Reznor. That's Nine Inch Nails. I don't know of any other artist where I could hear it two notes and I know it's him. Singular artist. I wished for most of my life I could be like that, but I'm not. I'm the type of artist that is more like, and I'm not in any way putting myself on a level of, I'm saying, without choosing a path, my natural inclination as far as making a body of work and then what will the next body of work sound like is much more akin to Prince or Neil Young, where you're just following a muse and an inspiration, and you have to. So those are the models, and there's a lot of people who have done that. PJ Harvey does that. For me, it's not about courage, because courage implies that one would be doing it for accolades, financial cash and prizes, or validation. So you're doing, courage implies you're, in spite of what you're trying to do, you're going to do it. For me, I've never made a large decision in my career based on outside things, money, outside forces, anything. Doesn't mean I haven't picked up a day gig where I had to pay the bills in order to take care of myself and my family. But as far as the direction of my quote unquote music career, it's a project and a work in progress. It has nothing to do with making money. I'm very fortunate that my job is that I get to make music and create art, but I've never made a decision saying, if you go this way, then you can buy a house, or you can get a bigger car, or you can get a watch, or you can have security, or put your kid through college. But if you go here, you go there. I just go, I got to do what I got to do, because I have to be true to this thing inside me that says, this is what you have to do.
You can certainly look at it that way, but you can also look at it in a way where, okay, so you're 16, 18 years old, you come up with a hip hop album. Justin Warfield's Supernaut is completely different from the first. It takes a certain amount of courage to I don't want to say alienate an audience, but to take what audience you have and try to redirect. It may not be a financial thing; it may be purely artistic. But that is,
Totally.
I mean, but there are a lot of artists that would maybe like to do that, are scared to death, or their record company says, "Don't you dare do something like that." But I mean, but I think that's where I'm seeing the word courage kind of come in.
Right. I understand. And in that instance, a little bit of record company oversight, a firm hand on the co-pilot, steering wheel, some dissenting voices saying no, or a little bit less bravado and courage would have been well advised, because I do not think that was a good decision to make that record, the Justin Warfield Supernaut. I think that throughout my career, and I hate that term because it makes me feel like I'm a banker or something, but throughout the project that I've been doing, right, for 35 years, and this project of making art, making stuff, my field trip to Planet Nine was so who I am, in a way that was so defiant. The problem with the Justin Warfield Supernaut is it's who I thought I wanted to be for a very short window that now is there for all eternity. And what I would have liked would have been someone who had the clarity, or I mean, here's the truth. I wasn't going to listen to anybody at that point. You couldn't tell me anything.
Right.
I was like, I figured, I'm like, man, I am 19 years old. I have a record deal. I still live at my parents' house, or I was just moving out of my parents' house in the Hollywood Hills. Like, life was, you couldn't tell me anything. I had a bank account. I could almost take care of myself. I was out of high school. I was signed to Quincy Jones's label. I was going to Lollapaloozas and doing all that. I was like, I'm going to make this incredible classic rock record. And if somebody would have said, I know you want to do that, we're going to give you a livable wage. We're going to keep you in the rehearsal room you're in for another 6 months. And we want you just to keep writing songs. That what you did with hip hop was really visionary and ahead of its time. Whatever you come up with next, with more time in the incubation, might be what's next with rock music.
Right.
But right now, this isn't it. We reject these demos. We want you to go incubate more, because what happened was, a year later, I ended up doing that after that album had already came out. And the project that followed it was the actual bridge between my field trip to Planet Nine and everything I did after. The band 1 Inch Punch was a mixture of the things that I was making in hip hop that were creative and progressive, and a nod to the past with like my songwriting influences, and a bit of the present and future and what was happening in indie rock. And so it's really just, I wish I could say to my younger self, just wait. But it didn't happen.
Right.
And it's okay, because as long as I can keep as long as I can keep that record off of DSPs, then I'm fine.
So let me ask you this, because I mean, it's interesting you'd say had someone from the record, said something, or giving you some more direction. I mean, you come from a fairly musical background. I mean, your dad was in the music business. He was, in the record industry. Your mom was pretty musical. I mean, you're exposed to all different kinds of things at a pretty young age, and here you are with a record contract at 16. Did you any insight early on, as far as maybe not about your specific music, but at least preparing you for what you might be facing along in making music?
Not at all, because I never wanted to be a musician. Like, I still don't. It's just what I do. It doesn't mean I'm not grateful, right? It doesn't mean that I don't feel very fortunate and blessed to be able to wake up come into my studio in a creative space, and not many people get to do what they love, and it provides food and shelter. But my dad was in the music industry as a record promo man,
Right.
and I went to radio stations with him when he promoted records, and I was afforded the opportunity to go to a couple concerts and in-store signings when groups would go to record stores and meet the fans, and to trade publications offices and record company offices. But honestly, it was just like if your dad was like an advertising agent or like worked at an auto plant. The only difference was it was much sexier on the outside, because rather than going on like the floor of GM and looking at like the way they assemble autos, it was an in-store for like the Jacksons, or it was Barry White's backyard, or it was the world premiere of the Thriller video.
Right.
Which are, I mean, my upbringing totally ties into the zeitgeist in the 80s and these things that were happening in urban and pop and black music. And it's unbelievable, and I'm so fortunate. But I wanted to make movies. I was much more concerned with movies. I knew music a lot, like pretty well, when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But like, music wasn't the thing that got me excited. It was going to the movies and getting out of the cinema and then going back in and seeing the movie again. It was the films that were coming out at the time, whether it was like The Breakfast Club, or whether it was Risky Business, Valley Girl. My mom turned me on to folk music and Laurel Canyon singer-songwriter music, and James Taylor and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and obviously the Beatles, and and my uncle turned me on to the Stones and Bowie
Hmm.
and Neil Young solo and Jimi Hendrix. But like my mom also put in front of me like, this is a great movie called Harold and Maude, and I was like, well, who's this Hal Ashby guy? Or
Right.
she turned me on to really challenging and thought provoking cinema for a young child that changed my perception of the world. And then the movies that were coming out when I was a teenager were the first real thoughtful films for teenagers and that Brat Pack generation. And it wasn't like Porky's anymore. So I was enthralled by what was happening in the cinema and I wanted to contribute. And by the time I saw The Brother from Another Planet, She's Gotta Have It, and movies like that, like once I discovered cinema and I saw something like John Cassavetes' Shadows on TV late one night, I was like, well, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I was going to go to film school, and that got totally derailed because a friend of mine was like, hey, this rap thing you're doing for fun in your bedroom, do you want to do it for real?
and then
And
and that did
so
it.
and like he brought me up to the house of his producer, who is, Kadada and Rashida Jones are dear friends. It was their older brother, QD3, who had just moved from Sweden and was a hip hop producer. He saw something in me, started to mentor and develop me along with my friend Kevin Higgs. And, within 2 years, I put out my first single. I still had every intention of going to film school. I got too busy and I didn't end up doing it. So I spent the rest of my time studying and educating myself on what would be necessary in order to pursue a life in film. And, 35 years later, I've directed a lot of music videos. I've written a lot of screenplays. I've made short films. I had a feature film in development, and now I'm writing two that I intend to do. So it's a circuitous journey, but it's one that I wouldn't change because whatever it is that I do in that space of filmmaking is going to be informed by the life that I've gotten to live.
Yeah. There's a couple of things. So I was in radio in the 80s, and I remember, record reps coming to radio stations, and being a father of three adult daughters now, I can tell you that radio stations of the 80s was never a place to bring your son to work day. Probably not the best place to bring a kid back all the way back then. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting when you talk about film, I heard another interview that you had done, and I thought it was kind of interesting how in a kind of a connected way, the way you were able to look at film and kind of extract it compositionally is not so unlike what you've been able to do with music or how you listen to music as a young age. Like you could understand how a song is created. You could understand, what went into it, whether it's the technological part of it or the artistic part or the story part of it. You have that ability to kind of extract like the important, maybe unseen elements of both. And that's a really interesting talent to have, especially as you're moving forward in a direction of music.
That's really interesting. I didn't, yeah, that sort of like extrapolation or deconstruction or pulling the essence out of something. I do remember there was one film in particular. It's incredibly problematic, and it's just so it will offend every group, and because that's just sort of the time, unfortunately. But I do remember there was some of the John Hughes movies like Weird Science, and I remember writing the script out longhand and pausing the VCR because I wanted to see what it looked like longhand. And that's a very odd thing to do when you're like 13 years old. I also remember that, and like this part is not unique to me. A lot of movies have quotable things that people say all the time.
Sure.
Sometimes it's the most annoying thing in the world when you have a friend that won't stop quoting, like, The Big Lebowski or Anchorman or whatever, right? But for some of us, it's real niche films and cult films. And you find your people sometimes not by like, oh, you're into Pavement and Guided by Voices, and you're also into Alice Coltrane, but, oh, like someone will say a movie reference, and like they'll say plate or shrimp or plate of shrimp, and you go, oh, I love Repo Man too. And that's like a little bit more niche and cult. But not a lot of people, I would imagine, also know what the source music playing in the background in the repo lot was when they just came from that scene, or how the shot was set up, and if it was wide and what was in the background, and what music cue follows it, and on what line of dialogue do they cut into the next scene, and what's happening in the scene, what is the dialogue, what is the underlying music bed, and what's happening in the story. And I do think I've always been very jealous of people who saw music in colors. And I don't know if it's called synesthesia,
Yeah.
but when I heard the people do that, I'm like, wow, I wish I had that. But what I did realize through the process of being interviewed is that I have something that I've never seen a term given to, which is just what I mentioned and described, that I can tell you in certain movie scenes what music is playing, what the dialogue is, what the actors are doing, the way that it's shot, what precedes it and what follows it. Because I take in movies in a very specific way upon multiple viewings. And a lot of my ideas about rhythm and pace has been created by that. Just like, even if I make a record like Death Rock Devotionals, it is very indebted to the music, even though on its face somebody may say, it sounds like you are getting into Skeletal Family or Ex-Mil Deutschland or Pink Turns Blue or Christian Death or Damned or Adolescence or, early Bauhaus. But the way that I make records is totally indebted to early 80s pop, whether it be Soft Cell, whether it be Madonna, whether it be the B-52s or the Pretenders, because the way that I conceive of music and the production, the background voices, the introducing new elements, it all comes from the production part, all comes from the advent of new wave and new romantic through hip hop, and the idea that the recording studio is an instrument.
Yeah.
And it all kind of sometimes goes back to like what I heard on a Prince record, what I heard on a Madonna record, what I heard on, a Thompson Twins record. It doesn't have to be the biggest group. It has to be something that impacted me.
But it's interesting because, when you're talking, because you're basically talking about deconstructing music or film or whatever, you have this ability to deconstruct something. It's not so unlike how you would put pieces back together in almost like in DJ work. You've done a lot of that. You're layering sounds on top of beats and samples, and it's like you're deconstructing something and putting it all back together. It's not really a synesthesia, but there is something that is unique about that ability. There's not a lot of people that are able to do it. I mean, obviously people have done it and done it successfully, but to have that is actually really pretty unique.
Well, I agree. I think that's one of the reasons why She Wants Revenge started, is because when I met Adam, we were young. And then when we reconnected many years later and got in a room and started talking about music and with the intention of making music together, it became clear that we both had that same sort of recall. And ultimately, I think is one of the reasons why people say that the work of She Wants Revenge is either derivative or too inspired by or too similar to things from the past. But I would argue when Mick Jagger started singing less sort of British influenced post skiffle, parallel with Beatles pop, but when he was singing Lady Jane in his sort of most proper, sort of London voice, I would say that by the time he through the influence of Brian Jones and his bandmates and his own interest in American blues, by the time he heard Howlin' Wolf and started approximating that voice and playing blues music, I think it was just saying, I love that so much, I want to make my version of it. So like no one looks at him, 60 odd years on and goes, hey, has anybody noticed that like Mick is just doing an imitation of a black Southern Delta bluesman, like no one says that, when he says, it's just like, it's just funny to me because when I hear things it's so clear to me. No, people at the time did say, oh, well, like Lennon was doing his best, Dylan on Norwegian Wood. Or there's eras of Paul McCartney where you're like, oh, that's a great Stevie Wonder song he did right there. But because Adam and I both think in terms, we don't say, hey, let's do a song that sounds like Depeche Mode, but this stuff comes out of us.
Yeah.
And we're just making music as one of the first I would say this, and then not to get too sort of high-minded or grandiose, but like when boomers were making music, their parents might have been into Lawrence Welk, or their parents might have been into Dave Brubeck, like who knows, you know what I mean? Like it's definitely not, their parents weren't into anything really progressive unless you're talking about some sort of jazz or blues. But the traditional sort of quote unquote, like the Caucasian music culturally was not challenging. So when they created something, like it was from the recent past, the distant past, and then what was happening culturally, if they're British in America, or if they're American, maybe in outside in the UK. Gen Xers are the first generation that got to draw on something cool and that came before them, right? Like it would be very tough. Like the Beatles are special and the groups that we love are special. Or even if you say like Bob Dylan, like he's taking like, Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and those things that came before, and he's making it cooler and more accessible and sexier. Well, Gen Xers are going, well, we're taking blues, we're taking first generation rock and roll, we're taking British Invasion, we're taking, like, so for someone like myself, there's so much that we grew up on, like listening to radio in the 80s, and you would get Robert Smith and The Cure in one breath, and then you might get Wall of Voodoo in the next, and you turn the station and you get, Run DMC. So that's very different listening than our parents. So of course, Gen Xers are going to have this incredible confluence of musical styles and cultural reference. And then you keep going and you go, okay, well, the millennials had even more.
Right.
And then the Gen Zs, they're just like, nothing came before, which is very punk rock. Nothing came before. That's amazing. And people that my age and your age generally reject that because you have to have respect for the past. Well, I don't think so. I think that if we don't understand music, it's generally because it's not by us and for us. And so I think that like a rejection of the past is interesting, but if you want to make music with longevity and grow as an artist, eventually you have to do some homework because otherwise it's just very inbred music.
Well, I think it's okay to have your influences, but when it really comes down to it, what winds up being the most important thing is the song. Have all the influences you want, but if the song itself is good, then it's not going to be seen as a good result. One of the things that's interesting about She Wants Revenge, things that I noticed right away in back and listening to those records, is that the song improves dramatically at that point in your career. Like all of a sudden that became a real focus. And if it incorporates all these influences, then great. But ultimately the kernel of importance is the song itself.
That's a really, no one's ever pointed it out, and that's really interesting. My first initial response is I think that's because all of the other rock records that I made, including 3 EPs with the band Tape that came between 1 Inch Punch and She Wants Revenge that are going to be released this year on DSPs. All of the other bands that I've been in before, the records and the songs were written in a rehearsal room. And so when you're writing songs in a rehearsal room, whether there's a principal songwriter calling out chord changes or whether it's a total democracy and you're jamming and finding songs, you can craft something into a pretty incredible song, but it's very different than when you're sat in a studio alone or with somebody else and crafting a song.
Right.
Because when you're jamming, there's a visceral, physical, and physiological thing that happens where you go, this feels good. And sometimes if the drummer's playing a certain way, or somebody playing a drum machine or percussion, or if you're just jamming without beats, if a bass player starts playing something and it inspires you on guitar and you're playing, it might feel good. And you're like, I like this. Now, maybe that's because it reminds you of something subconsciously that you heard years before. Maybe it's because it feels good to play. Maybe it's because it makes you move. Maybe it's because it elicits an emotion. But in any event, it's a physical thing, and a little bit of like your brain is turned off and it's more coming out of your hands and body. And then you take that and you craft it into a song. That's very different than two people sitting in front of on a couch or in front of a console with acoustic guitars and going, is it C? Is it B? Where do we go? Where can we go from here? And then really crafting something. And She Wants Revenge was the first time that I sat in a studio and wrote songs sitting down without it being coming from a jamming place. And even if we did jam, it was sitting at the console next to each other over a drum machine and talking through the things we were doing. So it was the most intentional songwriting. However, we did all that as instrumentals, and then the lyrics came very later, sometimes weeks or months.
Do you find that to be the harder part, is lyric writing?
I mean, to be honest, I don't feel that any of it's hard. It just depends. Like you know, Tom Petty said, you go to the water, you put your, you take your fishing rod, you drop the line in the water. Some days they're biting and some days they're not. So like the only the only difficult part about songwriting to me is at this point in my life, finding the time to go to the lake. um, and when I do, something happens. It's not always the final product. It's not always perfect. But at this point in my life, I don't know if it's intentional. So, I mean, it's not intentional on a conscious level, but I have found a path back to the spontaneity of when I first was making music on my first solo rap record, Planet Nine, and the spontaneity of the first She Wants Revenge record, where I would just sit down and write the song from beginning to end lyrically and then go sing it. And maybe I'd change one or two words or lines. I'm not saying that I did things more labored in between, but I really have tried to get back into a space. So the way that I write lyrics is, whether it's whatever the project is, whether it's She Wants Revenge or Warfield, when the music's done, or when there's enough for me to sing to, I'm usually driving in my car and listening to it.
Yeah.
And I start singing along to it. And I think it's a function of having my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road and being like focused on something else that allows like something to come through without intention and thinking about it or trying. I don't write in a traditional way. I don't sit down and go, what's a good opening line? I'm driving in my car. Sometimes I'm walking or riding a bike or running. And all of a sudden, when I'm listening to the music, a lyric comes to mind. And that lyric has a melody. And as soon as I have it, or I sing enough of it to where I stop the music in the car, I put on my voice notes, and I record what I just did right there, because that initial melody is not only going to be the melody of the song, but whatever I said, I keep those first lyrics, because to me, it's like a gift that came out of nowhere. And whatever it is a roadmap that I have to follow.
Right.
So for example, when I did the music for All the Fun, I came up with the guitar part. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I just picked up guitar and just my hand slid up and I just went, and I was like, oh, that's so simple. It's great. I love that. And then I was like, I'm going to record this right now. So I pulled up a drum machine. I put up a pattern that I knew I liked. It's literally just called punk rock on an old drum machine. And I've used it before. And She Wants Revenge. And it's this little toy drum machine. And I just like put it on punk rock, turned it up faster, 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 faster. Okay, that's a good tempo. I recorded like 3.5, 4 minutes of it. I picked up the guitar and I just played that. Then I picked up and then I was like, okay, it needs to change. Here, 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 this.
Right.
Done. Picked up a bass, record it. While I was doing that, I heard Tiffany eyes that set so sadistic. And I'm like, whoa, what the hell is that? And I was like, Tiffany eyes, dead set, so sadistic. I'm like, I need a second line. And I literally just went, from the look on your face, you'd swear she's a mystic. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Like that's not a skill. That's not, it might be an ability, but it's not a skill. And I don't think one can hone it.
Yeah.
You either know how to open yourself up to receive it or not. What I never do is sit in front of a laptop with a blank page and go, I never pick up a pen and go, like that's just not the way I write music. Because if I wait for that inspiration to come, then it's just my job to finish it. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's the way that I write.
I've talked to a
Music.
bunch of songwriters that kind of say the same thing, that whenever they go chasing for it, it never comes. But when they are open to it, when they allow it to come to them, that's when things start to really start to germinate. And that's you're right. That is probably more of an ability than a skill, but there are some people that are operating at a much higher level when it comes to that. Because I mean, let's face it, when you hear real shitty lyrics, they're
Right.
shitty lyrics. You can feel it, like this was the first draft for somebody, and it doesn't really feel like they allowed that, like they opened that creative door. It looks like they were chasing it.
Yeah, for sure. And also, it sometimes sounds like lazy. Like sometimes I'll do the process I said. Well, I always do that process. But then at some point, I look at something and go, that line is bumping me. That could be better. And I might take a few minutes to go, what's a better way of saying that? Or what's a better line? And sometimes I'll edit things because I feel that it's too on the nose or too revealing or
Right.
too vague.
So when it comes to the new record, the Death Rock Devotionals, I mean, it is a darker record, is more guitar driven than you've been in quite a long time. Again, did this just kind of come to you, or were you actively looking for like a darker sound? Were you looking to add more guitar to the songs?
Well, it's a good question. Two things. One, I wasn't looking to make darker music. I was looking to change the palette of instrumentation and how I make music. In She Wants Revenge, I play guitar. Very rarely I'll come up with the synthesizer part. In the early days, I would sometimes do that and come up with a string or a keyboard part. Primarily, my role is guitar player, lyricist, songwriter, co-songwriter in that band. When I do stuff at home alone that's not She Wants Revenge, I'm surrounded by keyboards and drum machines and basses and a drum set. I have the ability to make sound and create the kind of music I want with all of these instruments to some degree. So there was a couple of songs that I had sitting around that I knew that I wanted to reinterpret, repurpose, and like reinvent in a new way musically, but I didn't know how. When I wrote All the Fun and Getaway Far Away, which I wrote with my collaborator and very dear friend Thomas Froggatt, and when I wrote what ended up being If the World Comes Crashing Down Tonight, but it was just an instrumental for like almost a year because I needed to find the right vocals for it. Invariably, I ended up doing the melody. I ended up doing the melody that I originally came up with in the first voice note. But I found a way to make it more original and avoid sort of cliches that I thought it could do because of that sort of type of bluesy guitar riff. But anyways, I didn't say I want to make a darker record, but I knew coming from She Wants Revenge that I didn't want it to be a few things. I didn't want it to be dancey. I didn't want it to be sort of slinky and sexy. I didn't want it to be synth driven. I wanted it to be, and this wasn't like a conscious thought. When I wrote All the Fun, I was like, that's the blueprint. and I went, oh my God, of course I'm doing that, because I'm writing this project and I'm reading this book and I'm looking at these websites, and I'm immersed in 1985, and doing so, researching what happened in LA from 1979 to 84 to lead up to that. And so in doing that, of course it gets darker. And so then I go, oh, well, if that sounds like that, I'm going to use a different guitar pedal, and I'm going to plug in different gear, and I'm going to use a totally different palette of colors in order to paint this. And that's where the darkness came from, and that's where the guitar driven came from. And then the synthesizers I just made as like little flourishes and things, just to make it, to fill it out production wise, and make it more ominous in parts or more hopeful in parts. And and then because I wrote 90% of the bass lines on the record, it also sounds very different than the stuff I'd done before, because I'm coming up with the bass. In fact, many times writing songs on the bass guitar. So even though Thomas comes in and plays the bass, or Spencer comes in and plays guitar parts, Thomas replayed all the basses on the record, but most of them were things, except for like a couple of songs that like we wrote together. If it's a song that I wrote, like I came up with the bass line. And I did that, I had an album called Forever Never Changes. It's the name of the album and the project that I recorded during 2020 that came out a year and a half ago. And that record, I played everything except for like brought in very old friend to play drums. And I brought in like friends to play session guitar, which I'd never done before because I was making a true solo record. So we did it remotely during COVID. And there was like 2 or 3 parts that somebody else played on bass and on guitar. So I think the Death Rock Devotional sounds the way it did because I made it all sitting in this chair and with all this stuff.
Right.
And then that's very different than projects I've done in the past, unless it was like a hip hop thing.
So out of curiosity, you decide to do a solo record after being in and out of She Wants Revenge over the years. I mean, there's been a couple of hiatuses along the way, but always a couple of reunions. Where does that stand for you right now? Are you more focused on doing solo work now, or is She Want Revenge on a break right now? Where do things stand there?
Well, it's really funny because we're very, very, very deep into a She Wants Revenge album right now. So most of my time right now, at this moment right now, and I'm talking about like today, is I'm just recording She Wants Revenge music today after this talk. There will be She Wants Revenge, like a lot of She Wants Revenge work this year. It's the 20th anniversary of our first record.
Wow.
And there will be, I also have to finish a couple of Warfield B-sides because there's more songs that are going to come out that I'm really excited about. And Warfield and She Wants Revenge tours and festivals this year. So I'm knee deep in both. And I've never been more creatively fulfilled because I have not only 2 projects where I get to express different parts of myself, but I have 2 live bands that are so different, that are both some of my favorite musicians and people, where I get to just have this incredible group of musicians behind me making this incredible music. It doesn't mean that like I don't get ideas. I have a playlist of covers that I want to do and make a sort of very like homemade 8-track analog record of covers, whether even just like an EP of 5 or 6 songs that are songs that I love, not from like the great classic American songbook, but like things that I love that are really obscure and weird, sort of, I don't want to say singer-songwriter, I don't want to say Americana, but like, like there's weird songs that I love and I hear and I'm like, that song is incredible. Like I have to reinterpret it. And it's much more like soft rock. So, but invariably it's still going to sound like me.
Sure.
And I also want to make a hip hop album. I want to see what it sounds like to make hip hop in my 50s and have a lot of like guest MCs from back in my day and maybe even some newer guys. And so there's a lot I want to do musically, but there's also only so much time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all sounds fantastic. The fact that you have got so much going on and we're still able to peel a good 53 minutes with me today, it's pretty damn awesome. Justin, I really appreciate the time today. Best of luck with the record, and can't wait to hear what you got in store for She Wants Revenge, and actually everything you've just mentioned. I'm real curious to what it all shakes out to be. So good luck with all of it.
Thank you so much for your time, man. Really great conversation. Really one of the best conversations I've been able to have. And your insights are really strong and profound, and like your questions and your interest in things is really and it's inspiring. So thanks, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Justin, have a great day.
All right.
Appreciate it.
You too.
Take care
All
now.
right.
Bye-bye.
The name of the new Warfield album is called Darkwave Devotionals. Keep your eye out for the next album by She Wants Revenge, which will hopefully be released later this year. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.